All right. We are live.
What's up, everyone?
It's just me at this point, but I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm excited, man. Let's discuss waterfronts.
We love our waterfronts.
Flood zones, waterfronts.
Who doesn't love a good waterfront home?
I was trying to think when you asked me to be on here. I'm like, I can't recall what my first waterfront was.
First waterfront property?
Yeah, I'd have to actually look back. You think it would be like sticking in my memory about it, but for some reason, I think I might have. It might have. I don't think I sold it. I think it might have expired.
Listing? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to go way back.
I know. I had this. The one that's coming to mind is I had this one in Brick, and it was on St. James, and no, not St. James. I'm gonna have to look it up, but it was like 5 months. It was like it was going on 6 months for being listed, and then and I had a good rapport with the client. My mom was battling cancer at the time, and I had to go down to South Carolina, and they ended up listing with someone else while I was gone. And they put it up at the same price, and they got a contract within like a week. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? We're just pre-gaming over here. Welcome to this stream. We'll get started in a couple minutes.
I can't see it. Am I able to see if there's anyone watching live, or you want to be able to see it?
I can see it. Do you see on the top left corner? It says 4 and there's an eyeball.
No, I got nothing on my side.
Okay.
I wonder if it's on this.
So if you want, if you pull up your phone and open Facebook and then just put it on mute, you'll be able to see.
Oh, right.
What's up, Marty B? We got Melissa T in the house. If anybody has any questions before we get started about something, feel free to fire something off. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to get rolling.
The text bus go out yet? I didn't get it yet.
Yeah, it's set up for 3 o'clock.
It goes out in waves. It doesn't all go out at the same time.
Change it back to 2:30.
Maybe. What's up, Alicia?
Let me see if I got mine. Yep, no text blast yet. Good old car fire. Oh, there it goes.
Oh, you just got it?
Just got it. Uh-oh. Did your mic change? I'm getting feedback again.
Mine?
Yeah, just double check it.
Yeah, it did. Oh, no. Hold on a second. No, it's still the Hypercast.
Okay. I just heard a weird, static.
It says reduce mic background noise. You want me to do
that? Is it echo cancellation?
I have that already.
Okay. That's fine then. Just leave echo cancellation.
Does that sound better, what I just said?
Yeah.
I reduced the background noise.
It should be good now. Tommy Z just sent you the StreamYard link. right, guys, we're going to give it 2 more minutes. Anybody have any questions before we get going? Yeah, I'm hearing a little crackle too.
Yeah, you're still hearing it? Is it from my end?
I think so, yeah.
Hold on.
All right, looks like everybody's coming in now. The infamous Tommy Z in the house.
What up, what up?
Change your camera to 1080p, please, sir.
How do I do that? I don't have
Settings.
one.
Go to settings.
I still don't have one.
And then camera resolution. We have a camera, so I see you.
Did it do it?
1080p.
I mean, it's there.
right.
I gotta fix my background. For some reason, it like, ooh, I can touch up my appearance. How do I look?
Don't do that.
Do I have filters? Like I look like
Yeah.
look like my daughter just walked out of Ulta.
Yeah, you look like you got sunshine on your face.
We can call that the Richmond filter. Are we recorded yet?
Yep, always. Yeah, it actually makes if anybody doesn't know, if you use the filters on Zoom or anything else, it actually makes the picture lag because it's got to catch up with your movements and everything like that. So
Look at that.
there's a little delay in the camera, which is not the greatest when you're doing video. Pictures, whatever, but video, don't do it.
You ready? We'll get started. There's like 10 people on right now.
So just gonna get started. There we go, guys. All right, guys. So we are talking pretty much everything waterfronts today. We're just going to cover everything kind of on a surface level. You know, we can obviously dive even deeper, but we wanted to give you guys just a good core or base on what to do if you're walking into a waterfront listing, or if you have a buyer that's looking to buy on the waterfront. You know, the goal here today is to give you enough information and knowledge, to at least have like a meaningful conversation, with a client. So we'll start off with bulkheads, probably the most important thing when you're dealing with a waterfront. It's probably the first question that a buyer is going to ask you about is, what do you know about the bulkhead? Reason being, every house needs one. It's a big ticket item when you're dealing with homes on the water. And if the bulkhead's not newer and hasn't been replaced, it is something that, the buyer is going to have to take into consideration, when they're making their offer, just as they would if like the roof needs to be replaced or the HVAC needs to be replaced. It's something that you just can't let go. Over time, you don't want your fill and your pool and your patios and everything in your backyard dropping. When the bulkhead's not in good shape, it'll actually lose sand or lose dirt. It's what we call washout. It's the pressure in between the house and the bulkhead when the bulkhead's pushing, or especially in a wood bulkhead, when a bulkhead's pushing, you start to lose fill. So vinyl bulkheading is what you're seeing right in front of you. So it actually has wood on the top. So I know a lot of times people are confused. They see wood and they're like, oh, it's a wood bulkhead. But they don't pop their head over. Sometimes you got to get down on your hands and knees and pop out and look. But this is actually a vinyl bulkhead in between the wood here. You could see vinyl bulkheading right now. And this is just the price right in 2024. Numbers are probably going to continue to go up, but $400 a lineal foot. So your standard 50-foot wide lot, you're looking at a $20,000 bulkhead replacement. That's just the bulkhead, guys. That's not including a dock. Docks are more money. So if there is an existing dock that needs to be removed, that's a different price. But your vinyl bulkhead, you're looking at a 50-year lifespan. So, the good thing is if your client does it, or if it was done recently within the last 10 or 20 years, you're good to go. Vinyl bulkheads really, they've been used, I think, 20 years is really, how far back, they go as far as install.
I think even like early as 2000, Bo.
Yeah,
They
20
started
years.
doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you might catch something a little bit older, but it was really a newer product in the early 2000s, late 90s. You didn't really see it unless it was like a commercial job. So, residential homes now, it's really the standard for bulkheading. So, if somebody gives you a price and it's a wood bulkhead, oh, I got a price for a new bulkhead, but it's wood. It's not what anybody's doing. The standard's vinyl. If somebody wants to do wood, I guess it's their choice to do wood, but it's definitely not something that's recommended. So here is what a wood bulkhead looks like, just in case you've never seen one. I'm not sure if everybody's ever walked a waterfront property, but as you can see in this picture here, this wood bulkhead is starting to bow out. You can see the pressure on the top. You can see those pilings are no longer straight. It is now on an angle. This is something, if you saw this, if you could see after the second piling going up, you could see the tie back that's going across is kind of crooked and bent. That area is probably seeing a lot of pressure. And again, just imagine any kind of rain, that's coming through and putting pressure on this bulkhead, putting weight on this bulkhead. What happens over time is once it starts to bend, it's only going to get worse. Obviously it's not going to get better. Things, it starts to loosen up. You'll start to lose more sand. One thing that you guys can do if you're walking a property is if you see like any divots, in front or anywhere near the bulkhead, just a little divot, you're probably getting washed out in that area. That can actually happen if you have a vinyl bulkhead. If for some reason your neighbor doesn't have a vinyl bulkhead and they have a wood bulkhead, and the vinyl bulkheading on your lot wasn't like eld back into your property, a lot of times what you'll see is the vinyl bulkheads just go straight across. You do have the option, though, if you are doing a new bulkhead, to L it back into your property to make sure that you're not affected by your neighbor's bulkhead, which could cause some issues on your grading. It shouldn't be anything major. It's just something that the corner of your property you might lose some fill. So if you have, I don't know, a patio or something over there in that area, it may drop. So.
Real quick, I just want to touch on this, Bo.
Yeah.
So, guys, as you can see, I mean, this is a good example. Justin showed. I mean, this is a bad bulkhead. I mean, it needs to obviously be replaced. It's bowing. If the wood bulkhead is perfectly straight and it's not bowing like this, there is a little bit of a cheaper alternative that some people are able to do. You can only do it one time, and they basically do a new bulkhead in front of the old one. It's like they basically attach it. They'll attach a vinyl bulkhead to it. But it depends on how good the deadmans are, which I know Justin's getting into the next slide on that. So deadmans are pilings that are anchored in within a certain amount of feet away from the bulkhead. And that's how the bulkhead pilings kind of stay straight. So when they start to fail and they start to bow, chances are the deadmans have to be replaced too. So you're talking about not only ripping out that bulkhead, but you have to also replace the deadmans as well. And if you have a pool in the backyard, which I've seen some situations where there was a pool in the backyard, the bulkhead's bowing, and the deadmans now are right up against the pool. The pool had to be taken out to fix the bulkhead. The deadmans had to be replaced. I mean, sometimes it could be an exorbitant cost to get replaced. I mean, obviously, we're giving you some approximate numbers based on just a normal bulkhead replacement, but depending on what's in the backyard and what's been done, you might have to rip up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so that cost, guys, for bulkheading, that doesn't include excavating fill or bringing in fill. So each house is going to have its own kind of unique estimate done. It also depends on, do you need a barge to come in off the back, or are they able to access it, with just basic, machinery? Most houses you'll see a barge is required in order to install a bulkhead. But those are all unique things that have to be taken into consideration, with a quote. So we're kind of giving you just a ballpark range. but you're always going to tell your client that you're going to recommend them to, hire a bulkheading company to give them an accurate estimate. And I can tell you the estimates that were in place a year ago, 2 years ago, if you have a listing that you go to and they give you an estimate, chances are it's no longer good. The prices of everything have shot way up. So take that into consideration. Don't ever take somebody else's, listing agent's estimate and just assume that to be, the cost or the price. As a buyer's agent, make sure you're doing your due diligence.
Yeah. The other thing too, guys, is some of these companies, these bulkhead companies, they're, if your client's getting into a house, don't give them any projected timelines of how fast they can get this done. Some of these companies are booked out a whole season, so let's say hypothetically you're closing on the property in May, you might not be able to get in until next year, depending on how booked up, because they only do these replacements in some towns, they only do them during the springtime and in the fall. Some towns you don't see doing bulkhead replacements during the summer. So you got to be careful of what you're potentially telling your client, because it could be a year before they get it replaced.
All right, guys, we're going to go into the next slide, which is kind of all the ancillary things that you get, with a waterfront property, or the options. So this is a house I sold over on Sherrill and Toms River, jet ski docks. So those are, optional, obviously. But if you do see them, obviously there is value to it. Don't assume that it's included with the house. Most times it's not, or it's an option. If you don't see it listed in the included options, chances are the owner can take that with him. That's not something that's considered permanent. So don't assume either way. Make sure you ask. Same thing with the floating dock. Floating dock, this one was installed because, as you can see, there's some kayaks there. Just makes it easier, from the dock to get down with a kayak. Your height of a kayak versus your height of a 35-foot boat are different. So it would require really a floating dock to get in there with ease. One thing to take into consideration is obviously the tide levels change. So that floating dock is going to be able to move up and down with the water, where your permanent dock will not. If you could see to the right of the house on 350 Sherrill, that house has no dock. So you may see houses that have bulkheaded. That one's actually a vinyl bulkhead, which is great. The problem is that's not set up for a boat. So somebody would actually have to make an investment in order to put in a dock, in order to, park a boat there. Now, is it 100%, necessary? I mean, there's ways you could dock a boat without a dock, but you would not recommend doing that during the season. Again, the tides going up and down, the water moving, being able to kind of restrict your boat from bouncing around or cutting loose. You don't want your boat getting loose. So could you pull up to that house and get out? You could. It's just very difficult on that house next door without that dock, to access a boat, one way or the other. Boat docks, approximate cost, $250 a square foot. So this house had 63 feet on the water. They did the dock all the way across, so that's an option. You don't have to do the dock all the way across. Depends on the size of your boat. Depends on how you want to use it. If you just wanted a 40-foot dock because your boat was maybe 34 feet, that's fine. You don't necessarily need to do it the full length of your property, but, it does add value if you were to do it. Let's see. And boat lifts. So this is a house that Bruce Glorski sold. This is right on the other side of the lagoon of Silver Lagoon. This is over on Stephen. So this is a house that's on a lagoon. Did they need a boat lift? Technically, they didn't with this house. There are some homes that would require a boat lift really to be able to use your boat seasonally. And those are usually areas that are affected more by the tide. Lagoons are not as affected by the tide. There is obviously some impact if you go into like the end of a lagoon, where maybe some sand's being built up or they haven't dredged. There are some areas in Little Lake Harbor in Tuckerton where I know that the lagoons, the depth of the water is actually short. So this is something that you have to ask, depending on what your client's boat size is or what their draft is. They may require 4 feet of depth in order to dock their boat in the backyard. And if low tide in the backyard of a property is only 2.5 feet, their boat's not going to be able to hang out in that backyard. They're going to need a boat lift. And the problem with even having a boat lift with shallow water is that if it's 2.5 feet, how are you getting out? You got to wait till high tide or medium tide in order to drop your boat to get out. Now those times change all the way. It's not like it's like 5 o'clock every day, high tide, we can go out. The tides change. It's all different times throughout the year. So that's why you see like a lot of the end of lagoon properties or low depth properties may sell for less. So if you are pulling comps on a house, and that's something to take into consideration, maybe call a listing agent, find out if there's an issue with the depth. But your typical boat lift is about 16,000 pounds. Install for the whole thing, so that would include your electric and your pilings. It's approximately $20,000, and that's going to house a boat up to 35 feet. Anything above 35 feet, you're going to be considered, custom for a boat lift. The width of a boat is going to be different. The weight of a boat is going to be different. So, that's something that you would just kind of go to a company to get a custom estimate. Your bulkheading companies, they do install lifts, so they could actually give you an estimate. Some good bulkheading companies, if you need one. Kramer is a good bulkheading company. Grande Brothers is a good local bulkheading company. If anybody in the chat has a company that you've worked with that is good, just feel free to post them up. But there's a lot of bulkheading companies obviously down here, so finding one to do a job right now is not as much of an issue. Like Abram said, there was a time where a lot of these guys were backed up. I'd say they're probably not as backed up as they were in 2021, 2022. Getting material, I think, was one of the biggest issues. Pilings, wood, getting any wood, there was an issue during the pandemic, but things are starting to clear up now, which is good. But
I just want to touch on this real quick. So Bo nailed a good point. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but most boats, you need at least 3.5 feet of depth on a low tide. So Bo was talking about the depths of the water. So there's some areas of like Tom's River and Island Heights, and that's one of the reasons why they have to have docks go out, because they have to get to at least that 3.5 feet. But in regards to the boat lift, that's something that requires state approval, guys. So that does take some time. You can't just submit the permit to the town and go, hey, and try to get it in 30 days. It could take up to 6 months. So just prep your clients on that. If the boat lift's not there and they definitely need it, and it's near the end of the season, for them to start working on it. They can even start working on it while the deal's in progress, buy some time. But it does take some time to get the approvals.
Yeah, so it's a township approval and a state approval, because you're now going, usually beyond where your lot lines are. So usually the areas where you see the dock, a lot of times that's part of your lot, and you can go out into the water. That's something to check the survey on. There are some areas in Bayville where your lot line goes to the bulkhead and that's it. If you want to put a dock out, you actually need to pay a lease to Mr. Dean Maybe, who bought pretty much all the rights and waterways down in that Cedar Run area in Bayville, in the Glen Cove area. So if you are buying a house in Bayville or listing a house in Bayville, that is something to confirm with the listing agent or with the seller, because that's a big issue. You could be caught up in a lawsuit if that isn't disclosed. Chances are it's going to come out during title, but you don't want that to come out to your client during the title process, because that's where things kind of can get out of control. But there is a cost. I'm not sure where that cost is now, but I know it was I think a couple $1,000s a year they were charging you in a lease to dock or get into a boat. So that's a lot of money when you're considering a waterfront property per year, because that's not really what the state would charge you for a lease, unless you're like on the bay or on on the river. So one thing to also comment about this picture, as we're looking at it to the right, you could see an old wood bulkhead in a house that hasn't been raised. So again, There's some washout. You could see kind of that stone and that black, whatever that is, dirt, next to the bulkhead. There's definitely some washout going there, and that's why that you could see that bulkhead's not straight anymore.
But just keep it on this image real quick. I just wanted to mention this as well. It was on the previous one. Not sure if you guys know this, but since we're just talking about all waterfront, you'll notice the transition in the fencing, privacy fence to the 4-foot picket. So as soon as you hit the back property of where the house is, it has to transition to a 4-foot. And that's across the board, guys. I mean, you're not going to be able to have privacy fencing. You will see some people put some trees up. Somehow they get away with it. But if you're going to put up any fencing, you got to have, it's going to be 4 foot. You can go right to the bulkhead, and you can fence across like the one on Cheryl has. But again, has to be picket, has to be 4 foot, no more than 4 foot.
Yeah, I think the easy way to explain it is this is almost a front yard, but for boats.
Right.
So your rear setback, is almost like your front setback here, as far as where the house goes. Same thing with the fencing. So the fencing is also a visual thing, right? You want if you're living in a house next door to be able to kind of see more of the water. So if you are planting shrubbery and bushes and stuff like that, you could actually complain because it is affecting your site. And the township's going to, probably allow you to trim that bush if it's over that 4.5 feet. Again, a lot of people like privacy, so they don't mind it. But it is kind of like a site easement. Let's see. All right, guys. So elevation certificates. If you are ever showing a house on the water, listing a house on the water, this is another critical piece of information that you want to request. This is usually the first page of it, and we circled the engineered flood openings. So the older homes usually don't have this. They just usually have like a regular crawl space fence on them. The newer houses have temp fence or flood vents. The new flood vents will actually, pretty much self-open. So if there is flooding, it'll allow water to pass through. The reason that's in place is because it takes away some of the pressure from the house, where a lot of the homes that don't have these kinds of flood vents, if they were closed, and if there was a flood, the foundation would take more of an impact by not allowing the water to pass through than allowing the water to pass through. So think about it. If you've got water coming in on against the foundation and there's nothing on the other side but hollow, that allows the pressure to be pushed up against the foundation and allow it to bow in. Wave impact, obviously, especially if you're on a bayfront or a riverfront that was impacted by Sandy, or if you're low elevation, you're at high risk for your foundation buckling. This is how a lot of houses kind of got loose and ended up in the bay. The reason being is obviously if you've got equal pressure on the other side, if you allow the water to come in to the crawl space or into the foundation and it comes in and it's equal on both sides, then you're alleviating the pressure from the outside. You're no longer pushing in because you actually have weight and force on both sides. So the foundation should actually remain. You're allowing the crawl space to be flooded, but you're not allowing your house to wash away. So this is something that's required on anything that's a newer build, anything that has a significant amount of renovation. The township's going to require you to put them in. Now, do people take them out and do other things with them because they're finishing off the ground floor? They sure do. So that is something to, on a walkthrough, just take note of to make sure that it is a newer flood vent. And there are ways to obviously allow the water to pass through. Any comments on that, Abe?
Yeah, no, Bull nailed it. I mean, the flood vents aren't expensive, guys. They're roughly about $2 to $2.25 to purchase, and then usually a mason will charge $50 to $100 to install. So one of the things that I always do, and I know Justin does it as well. If I'm walking waterfront property, I actually walk the foundation and I see if they have flood vents, because even if the house wasn't raised, or if the elevation is good, that should be done. Those flood vents should be done, and that can be part of your negotiations. And sometimes, which we're going to get to, flood insurance could be impacted if you don't have flood vents. Some carriers The private carriers might not care, but I can tell you the FEMA policies, they do. And if you want that FEMA policy, they're going to want flood vents.
Yeah, it'll actually lower your insurance cost by having the flood vents in. So again, they're not required on the older properties, but those older properties, you're going to see a higher amount of insurance quote because of it. That's just one of the factors. So on this one, you can see we also circled here. This is showing AE6. That's the base flood elevation for the old maps. So the new maps are still not put into place. I don't know, Abe, have you heard? Or Tom, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add one thing before you moved on about, I just learned about this, but the difference between the crawl space square footage and the garage square footage, if need be, if you needed to, you can actually combine those into one space if there's passage from the garage to the crawl. Some people would have a vent, and I just had this experience. So they combined it. So let's say you had two vents going into the garage, and those could make you compliant by all being all around. You can break into the crawl space from the garage, and it combines everything together. So interesting little nuance. What?
With that scenario, was it because the crawl space was lower than the garage, or could it be even with?
No, it just had to do with that. We had two vents right in the garage, and if those were added to the outside with the crawl, we would have been compliant. So we cracked through the garage wall, and it combined everything together. So instead of just having 4 vents on the outside, there's now 6 vents total. So it was interesting. Just, I don't know, maybe you come across it. So there you go.
Yeah, I've seen it where sometimes you have to even install them in the garage doors, which are ugly, but it depends on what the insurance carrier is going to demand from you. So you might be ahead of the game and have flood vents, and then you go to get that FEMA policy, and they're like, "No, we want an extra one in the garage." I mean, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
that's more the township actually that they can require to add more flood vents, and in that case, if you've already done foundation, that's the cheapest way to do it. But like Abe said, it's not the most aesthetic. You have this kind of just steel kind of looking thing, cut into your garage door. Not aesthetically pleasing, especially with the nice garage doors that they're making these days. All right, so next page is pretty much going to show you, all your heights. And I've got a couple other slides to kind of give you an idea on like what's what, but we'll explain it to you before we get there. So top of bottom floor. So that's really your lowest floor space. So this is a house that was a split level. So the crawl space was below the garage level. So it's actually dug down below grade. So 2.9 feet was the bottom of the crawl space. This was actually a concrete floor. And in the crawl space, the previous owners had the hot water heater sitting on the ground. So that affects your lowest elevation of machinery. Now, it wasn't counted, but it should have been in the report, because this elevation cert was done before the next owner came along and installed a newer hot water heater. So what my client's doing is actually removing that hot water heater from the crawl space altogether. He's doing a tankless and putting it on the first floor, just to make sure that it's not problematic. We could already see like the bottom of the hot water heater was being rusted out because that crawl space does take on some water. We were actually closing right during that storm that we had. I think it was October or November. I forget the date, but when we just had a lot of rain and, high tide, and there was some water in the crawl space that wasn't there during any other time that, we had shown the property. So, but yeah, attached or top of the next higher floor. So what that would be in this house, maybe I'll go to the next slide. So this house was a split level. So you could see the garage level is 4.6. Crawl space is 2.9. So that arrow is just pointing to where the crawl space is. But the crawl space was underground, so it was like almost 1.5 feet below the garage floor. And there's actually a door from the garage to get down into the crawl space, and there was a step down below it. But it was a split level, so you could see front to back. So what they do is when they're counting the lowest point of the finished floor, it's actually the floor joist of this area. The rear part is the lowest part. It's not the front of the house. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the back of the house either, but it's where the lowest floor joist is in the actual house. And in here, it's in this back area because, again, it's a front to back split. So you can see from the back, it looks like just a traditional colonial. So on that sheet, it also shows lowest adjacent grade. So that is the lowest point around the house of grade. So I pointed here. That's the lowest grade that you can see in the picture. It may not necessarily mean the lowest grade. It could have been on the other side of the house. But you could see the highest adjacent grade at the 4.8 is probably up near the front of the house. Usually your yard will slope and grade from the front to the back. Not always the case, but just kind of giving you the idea on how to read this report and how to walk the property and understand all these nuances about the property. Now where this could come into play is if you were looking to install your machinery, right? So you have a central air conditioner usually. Sometimes you have generators on the outside of the property. So you're going to want to put those where you have your highest adjacent grade because you have to put a platform usually. Once you take your mechanicals out of your lowest adjacent grade area or above flood elevation, your insurance also gets reduced. So just by installing a platform for your generator or your AC to get it to 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet, you'll actually reduce your costs on flood insurance because now those things are not at risk during a flood of getting damaged. And again, it's if you were to go into the crawl space of this house, it had multiple crawl spaces, but this one in the back, again, highest floor, 6.5, and that's the bottom of the floor joist. So it's not the actual finished floor inside of the house, the bottom of the floor joist.
Bo, can you just go back a couple slides real quick on the elevation cert?
Yep.
So guys, this section that Bo highlighted here. This is really the section, and keep in mind, guys, we're always available. You can reach out to us. So if you're not sure and you want to double check, reach out to Justin, reach out to me, Tommy. We've analyzed like hundreds of these. So, but the top of where you see top of the bottom floor, this is what we were talking about with the flood vents. Sometimes the insurance carrier, if you don't have the flood vents, that's going to be the elevation that they're going to judge your insurance on. So what Justin's talking about, that bottom of the floor joist at 6.5, when you see B, that's a good number. But if they don't have flood vents, their elevation goes down lower. Because if there is a surge and there is anything that hits that foundation, it's going to cause the foundation to buckle and collapse. And so, the flood vents are critical. And depending on what insurance carrier you're getting, which I know we're getting to, the private insurance carriers, they typically don't care. But I can tell you guys that over the last 12 months, there's been a lot of private flood insurance carriers that have left the market, just because of what happened in Florida. So anytime you see some of these big hurricanes that happen and they impact a bunch of states, a bunch of private carriers will leave. FEMA is protected and guaranteed by the government, but I can tell you guys right now, the FEMA policies are much higher. And if you don't have proper elevation and you don't have flood vents and things like that, there's no questions. It can impact the buyer's affordability to buy. So definitely take a look at this, guys. And one of the things that we're going to touch on soon as well is this is based on the current maps of 6 feet. We're going to show you guys what the new preliminary maps are going to be. If the new preliminary maps are 8 feet, you got to educate your buyer because we don't know. We have no idea. They've been talking about adopting these new maps now for 10 years. But as soon as they do, the flood insurance policy is going to be based on the preliminary maps. And if you're a couple feet under, your $1,200, $1,300 policy could jump to $2,500. So just make sure you're educating your clients on that and you understand what they're getting into, because the house might not need to be lifted, which is great, but the insurance could make that determination. If the insurance is $5,000 a year, it might make sense to make that investment to lift the house.
All right, guys. So yeah, flood insurance. So again, the elevation cert is going to determine what your flood insurance is going to be. So you're going to want to make sure that pretty much everything that's on the elevation cert is accurate. The only way to really do that is to really know what you're doing. Engineers are really the ones that are going to certify an elevation cert. If there is an elevation cert that's like 15 years old and you see like there might be some new things or elevated things, doesn't necessarily mean it's reflected on the actual elevation cert. So you may see that, again, maybe they did their cert back when they built the house in '07, but they could have raised the machinery. So if that's not reflected on the actual cert, but they actually did the job of raising it, you could actually go back and have it modified in order to show that, in order to reduce your costs. Same thing with the flood vents. Don't assume that the elevation cert that you get is actually 100% up to date. If the owner, for whatever reason, just never, redid it, he could be paying, higher insurance premium. Maybe he didn't have insurance, or maybe his insurance was low enough where he just didn't care to, go and have this done. But again, two types of insurance: private, and then you have the FEMA. What I always recommend my clients to do, whether they're buying cash or not, or whether the, current private rate is good, is to get both, as far as a quote goes, just so they have an understanding that if private does leave the market, let's just say, God forbid, another storm came and hit the Jersey Shore, and, all of a sudden now, maybe your house was good, but private said, nope, we're not writing anything now. We saw 2 bad storms come within, a 10, 15-year period. So we're getting out of the market. We are no longer insuring here. Again, worst case scenario, but having an understanding of what the NFIP, flood insurance, costs, because that's something that won't go away. And it could actually increase, but at least, kind of worst case scenario. For some reason, private left the market, what you're left with. Because the cost differences could be $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a year, and that could be, a lot of money. And again, do you need to, have your client quote both? You don't need to, but, I always recommend just, getting it so they have a better understanding on, again, worst case scenario. But that's me. I'm always very conservative with what I do with my clients and what I advise my clients to do. So as you can see, coverage A, building property, 250, that's going to be your limit really on the building, guys. So if you have this elaborate house and somebody completely renovated it, but they didn't lift it, you have to take into consideration, if there is another storm, what is my cost to reconstruct? And if they didn't raise and it's at 7 feet and it got 6 inches of water last time, take a good look at the house, start adding up. Well, worst case scenario, if I had to redo all the floors because they installed hardwood, I had to redo all the cabinets, I got to redo the bathrooms, I got to redo all this stuff on the first floor, am I covered? And again, you're going to have to go down to the studs, so you're pretty much looking at, a new build, new construction build cost wise. And right now the, cost of construction is about $150 a square foot. Now you shouldn't have to worry about necessarily siding or potentially windows or roofing. So it shouldn't cost you that much for replacement. But again, if you've got like a 5,000 square foot ranch, chances are your cost is going to go beyond the 250. So keep that in mind. Make sure your client does understand that. Make sure your insurance guy, maybe understands that too. Because you might send them over an elevation cert, and they send you a quote back, but they never really have a conversation as far as, what's covered, what's replacement costs for, for a large ranch in that situation, that does get wiped out. Personal property, that can go up or down. That just depends on kind of your furniture and, things like that. Personal belongings, that doesn't, cover the kitchen cabinets or, light fixtures or counters or anything like that. So those are usually your standard things, that you're going to quote in a policy. Obviously, you could see pool repair, that could be something that you quote. That's ancillary. It's not really, something that you need in order to get insurance, but it is available in the private market.
So real quick, I just want to touch on that, Bo. Guys, I didn't mention this on the elevation cert, but if the elevation cert that you're presented, I know Justin kind of touched on it a little bit, but if it's pre-Sandy, I would recommend you get a new one or push to get a new one, because the way they measure the house to determine the elevations is they have dedicated markers that they use that are in all the different streets, like sewer caps or water markers and public knowledge. Well, Sandy, depending on the location, some of those markers got destroyed and they had to redo them. So the elevations changed. So if you see something pre-Sandy, the elevation cert, I'd probably recommend that you push your client to get another elevation cert. It's not expensive, guys. You typically get it between $600-700, but it would be the most accurate. And in regards to the private insurance, as Justin was talking about, is if they decide to leave the marketplace, what'll basically happen is when you come up for renewal, they're just basically saying we're not renewing you. Now this is a NFIP policy. If you have a FEMA policy, and as long as you maintain the policy, and let's say hypothetically the rates are going up quite a bit, I can tell you anyone that bought a Waterfront in the last 12 months, the flood insurance is very high compared to a couple of years ago, especially the NFIP rates. But as long as you guys maintain that rate, there's a law that they put in place after Sandy. It was passed, I believe, a year after Sandy. The most that they can raise your rate per year, as long as you're maintaining it, is 18%. So if the policy is $1,000 and the new rate is supposed to jump to $2,000, they can't just immediately jump you to that. They incrementally raise it over the course of 5 to 6 years until it hits that new rate. As long as you never lapse, so you can't lapse on it. You got to keep continuing on it because that's where they'll get you. And what's great about the NFIP policy, which we're going to touch on, is it is transferable. So you can't transfer a private policy to a new buyer. You can transfer this state law. So if someone has a low rate, they can transfer that to the new buyer and they continue that low rate even if the new actuary rates are higher.
Yeah, so the NFIP, so that's your VA purchase, FHA purchase, probably USDA, even though USDA is probably not financing on the water. But really, any government-backed mortgage lending is going to require this insurance. It's not negotiable. You can't say, "Oh, I got a better rate private." Well, they don't care. So if you have a buyer that is doing one of those loan types, make sure that they get this quote up front. Because if the owner gives you a private insurance rate and you just assume that that's going to be the rate, the lender's also going to take that into consideration as far as qualifying goes. And if the rate goes from 600 private to 3,000 through NFIP, that could kill your deal. So make sure you do that due diligence up front. And again, the only thing that you need for a flood quote is that elevation cert. Now, it's possible you can get a flood quote without it, but they would give you just the worst rate or the highest rate based upon probably what they're going to see on the ABFE maps, because obviously they don't have anything to write off of. So that's why this elevation cert is important. So if you are getting a listing, make sure that elevation cert is up to date, because again, these are all things that could come out of left field that kill your deal. You never want anything out of control, especially if you're listing a waterfront property. This is something that, I know me and Abram, when we go on listing appointments for waterfronts, we're always asking for this stuff up front. And if they don't have it, we're highly recommending that they get it before we go to market, because we can kind of control all the data. We can control all the numbers. This is the flood quote. I actually will go ahead and get a flood quote, for future buyers, even if my buyer has one. I'll go to Logan Dustin from the Dustin Agency, great insurance vendor that's local. And, within 24 hours, he can give me a private quote and he can give me an NFIP quote. Not something that's hard to do. The harder part is getting the elevation cert. That's something that could take you a week or two to get it. But if you're on the first appointment with a client, that's something that you're going to ask for, and just let them know you're not going to advise listing the house until you have that. Because that could actually affect the pricing on the house. If you find out that the insurance rate on a house is going to be $3,000, $4,000, that's going to affect your buyer pool. Now, you probably will have a good idea on what insurance will be based upon the elevation of the house, right? We all have eyes. We can all see how high off the street a house is. Obviously the newer houses, new construction, you really don't have to worry about those as much. Most of those houses are going to be built at least 2 feet above the elevation. And that's on the future maps. I'm right, Abe?
Yeah. So if it's, let's say, hypothetically 8 feet on the new maps that haven't been adopted, a new build will go 2 to 3 feet higher than that. And just to kind of give you an idea, when you go 2 to 3 feet above the new map heights, the insurance is typically under $500 a year. Sometimes as low as $400.
Yeah, I'm seeing more 500-600 right now. The prices are definitely creeping up.
Yeah, they probably are. I mean, I haven't seen an NFIP recent rate for 2024 yet. So
Yeah, and to answer Joe's question about did you say the NFIP is transferable and private is not? So private, it is possible that you could actually, get that same quote, but they won't just transfer it. They're going to go and look at the rates and look at, whatever numbers or, whatever projections that they have. They won't necessarily lock you in if for some reason the risk on their end has gone up higher. So, it is possible that you could actually get a lower on private, but it's not technically transferable, but you could go again to the same company and you could get the same rate or you could get lower. But with NFIP, it is 100% transferable. So that's the difference there. Not saying that you can't get a better deal with private, but there's that caveat. You can't promise a client, a buyer or a seller, that a new buyer is going to get the same rate or be able to take over that private policy. So again, that's why you do that due diligence up front, do your research, send it over to a flood guy and find out. He can write you a quote, again, within 24 hours, not that big of a deal. So this one, this is a house that I sold in Lavalette. So this is a house that actually my client's planning on raising. So it's on a crawl space. It's a ranch. It's like about 1,000 square feet. So he's buying it knowing that, this house probably got a foot of water, during the storm. They renovated it. It's great. Something that we didn't have substantial damage, which is good. He's going to rent it out for now, but in a year or two, he's going to lift it and then he's going to do full garages underneath. He's probably going to go up, 8 to 9 feet, making, pretty much a full first floor. 1,000 square feet's big. You could fit a 2-car garage plus have living space underneath the house. So there's some benefit to kind of his plan where we already did the numbers and figured out the cost to lift, probably worst case with, concrete all the way underneath and, having it, boarded on the exterior. So that way, it's enclosed. It's probably going to be about $150,000 to raise. He might be able to get a little bit cheaper because he is in construction. But, we priced that in and we took into account if we did raise it. I actually sent them comps already, and the comps for a raised house with that square footage with the garage are like 1.1 to 1.2, so we'll be about $1 million into it. And he's going to gain some equity from it too. So that's something to take into consideration on a house that isn't raised. Houses on slabs are a pain. That's why I mentioned this is on a crawl. Houses on slabs, the problem is that you've got to reframe the entire first floor because it's on a slab. There's nothing to lift up because there's no wood joists underneath. You can't just lift the slab, right? The slab gets eliminated. It's very difficult. You incur more costs because you've got to rewire your electrical. A lot more than on a joist or a crawl space. Your HVAC has to be all reworked. You've got to do the full framing of the entire first floor. So it's very problematic when you're dealing with a house that is on a slab that does need to be lifted. A lot of times you're just seeing those houses be knocked down because you do the numbers and the extra cost, to do all that legwork. It just doesn't add up, doesn't make sense. It's not every house, but that's something to take into consideration. Just imagine, how are you lifting a house that doesn't have any framing on the bottom? And also, if it's got low ceilings to begin with, now you're actually adding, framing on the bottom, which makes the ceilings even lower. So, this is a house that, again, my client had full knowledge. I over disclose on these houses that have not been lifted. I make sure that my client knows 100% all the way around. I try to talk them out of it, honestly, every single time. I will try to show them houses that are lifted. Again, this guy he is in construction, so he has a little bit more knowledge than a regular buyer. He's way more comfortable, with doing a lift than, probably a regular buyer. This isn't his seasonal. This is just a seasonal house for him. It's not a year round for him. So he doesn't have to worry about, moving out in order to lift it. He could do it in the off season. So all things to kind of take into consideration when you are talking with clients is understanding if a house does need to be lifted, they're going to need a lot more as far as estimates go and information goes, because you don't want to be brought into a lawsuit. I don't know have we dealt with any lawsuits, Tom, or heard of any lawsuits with houses that weren't lifted? No? Tom's on mute, but he's shaking his head no. So, again, I've always pushed my clients to go after the new construction, go after the elevated stuff, just because the cost to lift, it's only going up. A lot of the lifting companies have actually left the state. So there's very few left here, that are actually equipped to do a lift. You'll be able to do it, but again, the cost is a lot higher now than it was, back right after Sandy. All right. So if you don't have an elevation cert, I mean, number one, you should do this research anyway. But this is a site that you can access through our intranet page. So Region 2 Coastal was the old website. There's a redirect now. The redirect link is below. I will never remember that link. But if you do go to Region 2 Coastal, it works. And then also if you go to the intranet, it works. So what you're going to want to do is if you click on that view flood hazard info, then it has this drop down menu. You're going to hit what's my BFE for New York and New Jersey. You click that. And then it's going to bring you to this top map. Now it brings you to like New York City, the center of New York City. So you're going to put into this search bar here. You're going to click that little mirror thing. Click in, add in whatever the address is. And then it's going to actually pull up this map. And it'll zoom you pretty much to where the house is. So I'm not sure if you could see it, but there's a little circle inside the actual house here on Silver Lagoon. And then when I click on that circle, it'll outline it in red, and it'll actually bring me to a part where I can add different layers to the map. So you could see the old map, and then you could see the effective map. And then on the left-hand side, you can't really see it here, so we zoomed in. It'll actually show you what the old map is. So the NAVD 88, so that is the old maps. So that is actually showing the current zone is at AE6, and the new zone is supposed to go to a 7. So this property is like that. If you remember, that back floor joist is at 6.5. So that pretty much puts this house, that back of the house, underwater. Now, my client understands that. We went through it. He was actually a cash buyer. He got private insurance, and we had a conversation about, hey, if another storm comes through, you have in the back of the house, it's the family room, it's a bedroom and a bathroom. Are you okay with that being wiped out and having to redo it? We had that conversation, and he understood. Yes, I understand it. Obviously, your flood insurance will cover, that back area. I mean, it covers the whole house. But like where the kitchen was and where the bedrooms were, they were well above elevation, so not as much at risk if another storm came through. Past storm didn't get up into that area in the kitchen. So he had an understanding of, worst case storm comes through, this is probably going to be flooded out, and he was fine with it. So again, I can rest that night knowing that he understands that, and understands that, that's really why his rate was what it is. We had a conversation about that house too, about possibly lifting it. Now, split levels are really tricky to lift as well. You can do it, but it's tough because when you lift it, you're not really getting the full usage as you would lifting like a ranch style house, right? Because you lift a ranch, you lift the whole thing 9 feet. You don't have to mess with the roof or change anything. You can have storage underneath. You can have a garage underneath. You can really do whatever you want under there as far as non-finished space, play space, storage space, whatever the case may be. On a split level, it's a little bit different. So if you go up, let's say 9 feet to get a garage under the right side of the house, which there's already a garage on the left side of the house, now that floor is going to be, I don't know, it's going to be weird because it's a split level. And also with the roofs, because of the garage, you'd have to like convert that space in a garage, frame in that space, and then you're lifting that also. So it's a very tricky lift. It's something that my client on that house, he's not looking to do anything with it. He was fine just leaving it as is. But, again, one of those things within the conversation, if you're talking about buying houses that need to be lifted, split levels, bi-levels, those are not ideal to lift. Again, a bi-level is also on a slab for the most part. So you're dealing with, again, reframing out the first floor. And then just think about lifting a bi-level into the air. I know they exist, but you're like 15 steps, 12 feet to get up to the front door. It just is weird. Nobody wants to walk up 12, 15 steps to get up to their front door. Now obviously you could add access into the garage area, but the also part of that is, right, you lift the garage, you walk. I've seen them. The garage floor is the next floor above the garage is also 15 feet in the air. So you have all this like dead space. So it's not really an efficient, house to lift, which is why you usually don't see them lifted. And then also, guys, once you lift a house too, you have to take into consideration the setback with stairs. If you're going 15 stairs up to the first floor, like how are those stairs coming down? A lot of times your stairs are going to have to cut into like where your driveway is, or they have to be rearranged or wrapped around. So it's a lot to take into consideration, with a house to be lifted. That's why I always say, if you're looking for a house that needs to be lifted, look for a ranch or look for like a colonial that's on a crawl. Those are the two best candidates. Ranch is probably the best house to lift. Colonial still, again, kind of problematic, but can be done. So on the bottom, you can see it says, what is the estimated ground elevation at this location? It says 3 to 4 feet. That's always good to know, because if you don't have an elevation cert, you now have something to go off of. You can now start taking some measurements and say, all right, if they're saying the ground level is 3 to 4 feet, all right, if I go off the ground level with my tape measure to the bottom of the lowest floor joist, that looks to be around 6 or 7. Now, you can't say that you're certifying these numbers, but in the absence of an elevation cert, it allows you to do some sort of due diligence to see where am I at against the level. If you knew that the house was 4 feet above grade in this situation, that, oh, I'm right at flood elevation. I'm right at the 7 feet, or if it's 5 feet up, oh, I'm above the flood elevation. Now it's based upon this ABFE. I can't certify it. You still need to do an elevation cert. But again, it just gives you a little bit more information to start making decisions in those situations, in the absence of having that elevation cert. You could have ground elevations that are 6 or 7 feet. I just sold a house last year in Point Pleasant, right on the water, where the elevation of the actual ground was 8 feet. So the house was actually not even in a flood zone. Part of the backyard was, because the backyard sloped, but the house was not in a flood zone, and it was a ranch. So that house doesn't ever have to be lifted. It didn't even get any water during a storm. Now it obviously got water in the crawl space, but ground level is important. If you have an area that has a high ground level, I think there's more value to that property. And that's why, like my client in that situation, he loved it because he wanted a ranch. He didn't want to have to lift a house and have all these stairs and stuff. And in this case, he didn't have to. He could just renovate it and he's fine. Very unique, but you do find them. There are areas also in Little Lake Harbor where the ground level is really high. You could see on a lot of the bulkheads down there, a big gap between the top of the property or the lower of the property and where the water line is. You see like a lot of floating docks down there. There are a lot of areas that are, again, that have depth issues down there too. So that's just, another issue. I guess another issue we didn't really put a slide in here for it, but another issue, is your access for boating to open waters, talking about going through like lagoons and channels and the depth, your time out for a boater is very important. So if you have a boater that wants to be out in the Barnegat Bay and he's in Beach Haven West and he's all the way down 72, where it's a no wake zone, it could take him 30 to 40 minutes just to get out to open water. So just imagine every time in and out, 30 to 40 minutes each way, plus the gas. That actually is very expensive when you have a boat. These are all things that your client's going to want to consider. If they're a new boater, they may not know this. It's going to be up to you to really present that argument. Now that's where you find a lot of the cheaper houses. If you see a cheaper house, you have to question, why is this cheaper? Look on the map. See, all right, if I had a boat, how long would it take me? It's like commuting to work, right? You want to know how long it's going to take. Just because, it's in a good neighborhood, in which Beach Haven West is a great neighborhood, there's different values on where that location is on the lagoon. Substantial damage worksheet. So this is something to ask for on any property that hasn't been elevated. So this was on one of Bruce's active listings. This is a 52 Pilot. which is for sale. So if you have a buyer that might be interested in a property on the water, it is still available. But you can see that the damage here did not exceed the 50%. The assessed improvement value, so that's the number at the time of the storm. So if you're looking at improvement value for today, it's going to be much higher. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the estimated damage that was repaired from the storm, and then also the assessed value of the improvements, not of the land. So there's an improvement assessment and there's a land assessment. They're two different things. You're looking at the improvement assessment, but again, you're not going to see that in a 2023 assessment. This is obviously going back. So most homes have already done this, that have had work, redone to the property. In the off chance of it's a property that maybe they didn't put it back together or they didn't do anything. I mean, they were required, to do this if they were replacing anything. We obviously know that not everybody went for permits for work in Toms River. So if this is a house that got water, during Sandy, this is one of the things that you're asking for. If they don't have it for some reason, maybe they bought it and the previous guy got it, you can file for an open request. And if it comes up blank or nothing's there, that's something that you're going to want to do more digging on, because you don't want to have to deal with the town going back and saying, oh yeah, they redid this house and, we know it was damaged, but they never came in for permits on things. And, yeah, they went over 50%. Now you're required to lift if you're over the 50% substantial damage. So something to keep in mind. Rare occasion, but again, just one more piece of paperwork that you have to ask for if you're selling homes on the water.
Yeah, I just want to touch on this substantial damage. So guys, obviously you can see here 29,000 and change was the damage. The improved assessment 106,000. So about 30% damage. Obviously, there's a 50% threshold that if you're over the 50%, the town will force you to raise it. They've been pretty good recently. There was just happened last year that the houses that weren't raised, FEMA came out. They were going to start fining everyone $1,000 a month. And then at the time, Mayor Mo Hill, I guess that's probably the only thing good that he did was he put a stop to it or put a hold on it. But I wanted to specifically bring up when you're under the 50%. So this one's 30%. And I've run into this a couple of times with ranches. So this happens to be a ranch on the water. So let's say hypothetically Bruce gets a buyer that wants to add an addition onto this house, add a second level to it. So they're like, oh, cool, I don't have to raise it. They want to add an addition. Any capital improvement you do to the house, and capital improvement is an addition or any big improvement on the exterior that's attached to the house, what they do is they take the cost of that number and they add it to the damage number. And if it goes over the 50%, then they're going to make you raise the house with that improvement. So I had a house on the bay. It was on Bayview. I can't remember the exact address at the moment, but he was actually 49% damage. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is great. He doesn't have to raise the house. Well, I had crazy bidding wars on it, and all the offers that went way over asking price, they wanted to add an addition. Well, he was at 49%. Any addition, typically, you're looking at 100,000 plus, which immediately puts you over the 50% threshold, and that means the town is going to force you to raise the house if you want to do that big capital improvement. So keep that in mind, guys. It is a law. It's in place. It's impossible to fight. I mean, probably the only thing you can do to fight.
Not impossible.
I should say not possible, but one of the things that you can do is get the improved assessment updated to the current market value. So if this one was done at the time of Sandy and the improved value has gone up, you can get those percentages changed, but they are going to take that into account. And if it goes over the 50%, it can be an issue.
Yeah, I had a client that improved and he went over the 50% in improvements and they wanted him to raise. He did fight it though. It was a maybe 3 to 4 year legal battle with about $200,000 in legal fees put up front. He actually won damages also. But again, I mean, you don't want to put your client in a position where they got to come out of pocket $200,000 up front, and wait 3 to 4 years, for resolution. Those are, unique circumstances. I mean, that's definitely not the norm, but that actually just happened in Tom's River. So, all right. Next up, riparian grants and leases. So the area that you see cleared is actually 525 Bayview. That's actually brand new construction house that me and Abe listed and sold. We got the lot. There was a cape on it. It was in really bad shape. What did we get that for? 535?
No, that was 725, and that was an SD house. So that was a substantial damage house that had to be knocked down.
Yep. So 725 just for land. And as you could see, there's no dock on our lot. So you can't even get a boat out with the existing setup. Abe, was the house that you're talking about the bi-level across the street on Bayview?
No, you're talking about the house
that needed that was at 49%.
No, it's not across the street. It's around the corner there, around the bay. It's a ranch. It's still there. The guy that bought it never raised it.
Yeah, because that bi-level had to be low.
That was low. That was low. So remember we were talking about before, guys, and this is a great illustration here about the 3.5 foot water level on low tide. So we obviously our builder, we priced out a new construction home with the dock. We priced it at $2 million. We got the $2 million. It should be done in the next couple months. They have to go out 100 feet just to get to that 3.5 foot low tide depth water. So that's where that comes in. Initially our builder, which the buyer knew they were getting a dock, but he was thinking, well, maybe I can get away with 50 feet. No, the minimum he has to go out is 100 just to hit that 3.5 foot low tide depth for the water. So he just got approvals for it. That's going to be starting soon. But yeah, that was part of the price that we quoted. And this is something that if you guys are getting into this element where you're going to be pitching a new construction lot to a builder or an investor that's going to build a new house, these are things you got to definitely take into account. Does it have a dock? What's the dock going to cost? How far do we have to go out? Most of Green Island, this is Green Island, almost all the houses on Green Island have riparian leases. So this is a lease that we had to get approval for the state. It took about 6 months, and we just got approval, and now we're going through the process of the town, and we should be able to start construction soon on it.
Yeah, so Josh asked the 50% based on current assessed structure value or at the time of Sandy. It's the improvement assessment. So take out the land assessment. And yes, it's at the time of Sandy, not currently. So Bruce's, I actually looked up his assessment on that property for improvement, and it went up to $280,000 currently. So, there's some question marks, with being able to kind of improve your property, right? There's certain things that come up over time that need to be done, such as like a roof, right? Why, if I'm spending $15,000 on a roof, and that's an expense, like why should that count against my cap for substantial damage? So there's some issues with it still that the township has not really clarified. We voiced that in a meeting with them along with the CO thing back last year. And, it is something that they had to figure out and address. The problem is that they've now just continued to kind of delay, finding a lot of these people or mandating that these houses have been demolished. So they're just kind of still dealing with the past. Hopefully they'll be working in the present pretty soon, because obviously, Sandy was 11, 12 years ago now. So
12 years ago, coming up.
It is something that should not affect, future renovations. It should just kind of, live in the past for renovations that needed to bring this property back up based on Sandy damage, not because, my kitchen's outdated and I want to redo it, or I want to redo tile, or, I got to put in new windows or new sliders and things like that. I want to just update my house. It shouldn't take that into consideration, but at the current moment, it can. So
real quick too, Bo, before you change it up, if you happen, which is rare, there's only about 60 substantial damage houses that the town has record of in Tom's River. This is just Tom's River. But if you happen to get an opportunity where you meet with someone and they have an SD house, they're over 50% damage, their value is going to be substantially different compared to a non-SD house, because they're going to have to be raised. I can tell you this one on 525 Bayview. It was a letter from the township. Anyone that buys the house, there was an affidavit that had to be signed either the house is being knocked down or that the buyer acknowledges that they are going to have to raise the house within a certain period of time. So the cost of raising it is part of that value. So if you have someone that's fighting you on the value and you're showing comps, you can't compare an SD house to a non-SD house. The value is substantially less, which is why this house on this lot, which is a bayfront lot, pretty much went for lot value.
Yeah, which, was pricey. That was a big roll of the dice, to buy a piece of land for $700,000+, and hopefully to sell a property for $2 million at the time. But the market's bearing it for sure. We're seeing that the waterfront market at the top end, in at least Toms River and Brick, those are kind of collateral markets. Anything new construction on open water, I mean, you're going to be above $2 million. And I think that's something that's going to be the norm. So, I mean, even the regular residential on the lagoons, we're seeing the worst built homes selling for $1 million. Crazy, over the course of just 7 years, the houses were half that, but it's still a hot market. I think the great thing that we've learned about the waterfront market, it is very cyclical. You're dealing with a lot more people that are not looking at this as a familial year-round residence. When they see gains, they're willing to let these properties go. They're not going to, be like the family. Oh, I got to hold on to it, or I got to try to upsize, or I got to save more money to get into a new house, or I got to figure out where I want to go. You're not really dealing with that on the waterfront. Sometimes they are making another move on the water, but because it's a secondary house, it's easy. They have another house that they live in full time, for the most part. And these people are more business minded, than your typical inland buyer that's looking to buy a house, for their family. So keep that in mind. It is a different kind of buyer, and they move a lot quicker. So you might sell a house on the water, and I wouldn't be surprised in 4 to 7 years. You're going to get a phone call from that person wanting to either just sell because they don't use the house enough, or they need something bigger, or they want something smaller. It's easy for them to transact these houses. They don't really, if it's not being used, most of these houses are only used like 3 or 4 months out of the year. It's easy to part with these properties. So it is something that we push our agents to focus on. Hopefully this gave you guys, some better knowledge on how to deal with them. But very fruitful if you can kind of get into an area, get into a market that has these waterfront properties.
And guys, definitely stay in touch with your bayfront buyers, because there's a good possibility within 3 to 5 years they're going to be selling it. Most of the people that buy on the bay, they don't understand the type of winds and waves and everything that kind of hit the back of the house. And then the main reason that a lot of people like buying on the bay is because of the view. I mean, the view is spectacular, but it is challenging even on a calm day to entertain. You just have this constant breezes that are blowing stuff off your table, and becomes a challenge to entertain. And I can tell you, most people that I've helped buy on the bay, the next gravitation is they're like, all right, I want to sell on bayfront. They look at riverfronts and they're going back to the lagoon. So stay in touch with them, because you're probably going to end up getting that sale sometime in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, very true. And a lot of the houses that we're building new construction with our builder, we're recommending that the builder leave some space underneath the house, so that way you can kind of provide, you can provide, some wind blockage underneath the house, especially if you're dealing with a house on the bay, and a lot more than you could on the outside. Like you couldn't build a wall outside of the property in the backyard, in that setback, but if you have an area that's enclosed underneath the house, that's actually going to be very valuable, especially the people that have lived on the water or visited homes on the water before. Because like what Abe said, if you're throwing a party and, You just got a wind gust, and now all the cups and food and everything's flying, and your barbecue grill doesn't stay lit, and in the high winds, all your stuff's blown into the pool. I mean, life on the open water is pretty extreme. So when you live there year round, you experience it. Howling winds and the driving rains. It's an adventure, that's for sure. So this next slide is that Bayview property. So this is showing kind of what we built on this property. The nice thing is that you could fit a pool on it. A lot of these houses a lot of these lots that are 50 by 100, very difficult to fit a pool on it. One of the things that we covered in the previous slides, was the helical piles or with the deadmans. So part of the issue with if you have a property that has deadmans is going to be, where are they on the lot? How deep is your pool? You might not be able to go up to that rear yard setback for a pool like you're showing here of the 8 feet, depending on where their deadmans are. So it could affect your ability to put a pool in. So again, questions to be asked if your client wants to put a pool in. That's something that you need to find out. What kind of tiebacks does this property have? How deep are they? You might have to do some due diligence. I mean, if the seller doesn't know or the agent doesn't know, there's ways to find out. You can call Hydroscience. They have like a magnometer. They can see how deep it is, and they can give you an idea on the depth. But it's another charge, another inspection to figure that out. And you might find that they're only 3 or 4 feet deep. So who's putting a pool in that's only 3 or 4 feet? You could have to push the pool back, further off of that setback. There might be technically room for it, but are you going to cut your tiebacks, for your bulkhead so you can fit a pool in? You're not going to do that. So it's very important to ask that question too. So on this one, this survey we're showing you because it shows on any tidal water, you have to be very aware of tidelands. We're going to let Abe go into that because I think Abe is, really a master of understanding tidelands.
So this lot, guys, was actually, and Justin was talking about before. It's a big gamble. This is one of the reasons why you got to be very educated when you're talking to a builder or talking to an investor that wants to buy on, especially a $700,000 lot. What that lot is entailed. Does it have any issues on tidelands claims? Can you put a dock out? Is there an issue? Is there a grant on the property? This was a pretty easy lot in regards to that. Typically, guys, when you see neighboring properties, and Green Island has this advantage, so you can see the 2 docks on the neighboring properties are going out. There's a good, very, very, very good possibility you're going to be able to get a riparian lease granted from the state to be able to put a dock out. Now, you can't say it's guaranteed because you got to make sure that there's no tidelands claims on the property. So, this property doesn't have that issue. But I can tell you there are waterfront properties that we've run into that has a tideland claim on it. And what that means is at some point during the course of the previous owners to the current owner, someone did work on the property without getting state approvals, and the state found out about it, and they throw a claim on it. And that claim on that property is basically all the back lease payments that they want collected. So I've had a situation where it went back like 50 years, that someone put a bulkhead in or filled in an area of the property without state approval. And they where the bulkhead was coming in, they decided to fill in more, and they expanded the bulkhead, and they didn't go through state approval. And great, they had a great property that they used, but now it becomes a problem when they sell, because selling a property with tidelands claims on them, you got to get that straightened out. No title company is going to basically insure the policy. So we had a situation on a lot. I don't have the survey on it. This was a lot that Bruce actually had listed. It was actually in Money Island, and actually our builder. We presented to our builder, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm interested in this lot." Well, fortunately, our builder owns an engineering firm, so it makes things a little bit easier for us to kind of get some information and dig into it. But the property had, along the backside of the bulkhead, had this big it was like this big curve that curved in from the bulkhead into the property. And it was like 28% riparian's claim on the property that the state had. To rectify that claim, it cost $60,000 to get that straightened out with the state for them to remove it. So Bruce had numerous offers. Unfortunately, it didn't work for Aria because that claim had to be paid. And long story short, the seller at the time was very, very tough-minded and wouldn't listen to anything we were trying to educate him on in regards to how Thailand's claims are. And after the fifth or sixth offer that backed out, eventually he ended up taking a hit on it to satisfy the claim. It was his issue. He bought the property. He never got a title policy on it, never checked Thailand's claims. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, guys, but I've seen some crazier stuff. This guy bought this property cash and didn't have a Thailand search on it. And now he sat on it for years. And lo and behold, there's a Thailand's issue. So you guys definitely got to check that out. I can tell you, title companies can run it. They could check it. So if the property doesn't have a survey that could show what's on the property, you can have a title company run a Thailand search. It is a little pricey. It's not like a typical search. So if your client is very, very serious, you might want to check that out ahead of time. It could take not at 24 or 48 hours. I've had some situations on Thailand's claims, guys, that title could take 2 weeks, sometimes a month, to dig into when that Thailand's claim happened and how far back it went, and when it started. So it could be a big problem. So definitely do not want to wait on some properties all the way to closing to run title, because the deal can end up causing major delays. Now,
I pulled that up on a map. That's the 1417 homes. You can see they were building a house there.
30 homes. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at subdividing it, splitting it into 2 lots. As you can see right there on the map, I mean, you don't see a dock coming out. That was the biggest thing, right? We knew we could build a house, but we didn't know if we could build a dock. And how are you selling for a premium, for what we need to get as a builder, when you can't dock a boat? There was that kind of question that remained, and there was a risk. There was a risk that we acquire the property, we go through the process, it takes a year or two, and then we could put something in. But, the builder was not willing to take the risk at the price that the seller, was asking. So, that's business sometimes, and you could see they just built one house there. So it was probably an end user who bought it just for himself. I didn't see that house ever get listed for sale. So they were willing to pay a little bit more and assume that risk. Right.
Now, obviously, guys, I touched a little bit on leases. Grants, they don't give out anymore. So if a property has a grant, there's no questions. It has more value than a property that doesn't. It's ownership of the water. You don't have to pay those lease fees to the state. You're able to do improvements, with docks and things like that without going through the state approvals as much as with leases. But you definitely got to do your due diligence, guys. Just because it has a grant, you got to check to see, do they have all the proper paperwork on it? Does the deed show the grant? Does it define how far it goes out and what can be done? I had a property that this was actually on Brooks. I sold this property back in, I think it was 2019 on Brooks. And they had grant paperwork. We were looking at the deed, but there was part of the grant when they did this boathouse. It wasn't clear on if the way the bulkhead was shaped, if the boathouse was included in that. If they were able to include it, did they bring fill in that wasn't necessary? Because sometimes grants, guys, it might not be all encompassing. Like, okay, here's the lot. It's 50 feet wide. The grant's 50 feet wide. Sometimes grants might be 30 feet of the property, and that other 20 feet, and so this particular property on Brooks was very similar to this situation. The grant went out very far, but there was a sliver that the grant didn't cover. And we were about to close, and this came back on title, and we had to hire another firm to dig into this. It delayed the closing a month, and they had to go back to the 1800s to look at when this property was initially formed, 1892. I mean, that's how far back, to look at the exact description of when that grant was formulated. And then they determined, okay, yes, what the guy did was correct. And they updated all the paperwork, and the deeds were updated to reflect it. Sometimes, guys, you don't get that lucky where you could go back that far and see all that data. But if we couldn't figure that out, the price would have been impacted a couple $100,000. So thankfully we discovered it, we got it cleared up, and my clients are still there and they love it. And they've been living there full time.
Cool. Well, if anybody has any questions, shoot them in the chat now. I know this was a little long, but I feel like waterfronts. There's a lot
of information.
There's a lot to them, man. You can't just jump in trying to do a waterfront deal, without knowing all this stuff. But I think we covered the majority of it. I mean, again, I think we could dive deeper on, each thing that we highlighted. Every property is honestly going to be unique. There's communities that have, random things going on with them. Those are all just intricate, things you've got to learn more about in asking. We can't obviously cover, every single section of every waterfront property. But, there's areas that are known to have, tideline claims and issues on each and every property. There's properties with easements. There's sections of Cranmore that have like sewer easements going out to the river. There's sections with easements that, go out for public access that are, right on people's properties. So there's just a lot of random, nuances. These are all things, again, if you have surveys, if you have elevation certs, if you do your due diligence and get your flood insurance, I mean, you're just arming your client with enough information to make a decision and, hopefully make the right decision, and that's all we can do. Obviously we don't know everything about every property in every community or every area. But if you do run into an issue that we did not cover or have a question about something that we didn't cover, feel free to ask us. If we don't know, we'll kind of help guide you to find, the right information.
Yeah.
There's areas even in like Windsor Park where, like a lot of that area is all well, or Shelter Cove is all well. And, there's little nuances about, building in an area that has well. So, but yeah, if nobody has any questions, we'll wrap up. Will this be recorded? Yes, it's recorded. It'll be posted on YouTube, and we are working on getting these uploaded into the intranet. I think Tommy's looking to put these in like Mac Center or something.
Doesn't the recording automatically can be accessed on Facebook after we're done? Or not?
Yeah, it'll exist on Facebook as well.
Okay. Yeah, so you guys can access it on the Facebook group page. But yeah, guys, there's a lot to it. We're always available. I mean, there's been some really crazy scenarios we've all run into, and I love seeing new stuff. So I mean, hit us with something that we're not knowledgeable on, because I'd love to dig into it and figure it out and be able to help you guys. But for the most part, we can pretty much help you on almost anything. I've run into so many different scenarios, and so is Justin. There's a lot to learn on this, guys. It's not something you're going to figure out on one deal. I'm doing this a long time, and I'm still learning stuff. So
yeah, we have some experts in the office too. One just popped up, Louisa Sagarish. I'd call it, she's an expert. I'd put her up against anybody with waterfronts. Bruce Glorsky, he knows what's going on with waterfronts. Ken Duncan, he's a good waterfront guy. He's also a boater. So he actually adds a different element. I'm not a boater, so if somebody has like a specific question, like I just know what people tell me, but I'm not on the boat. Either is Abe. We're not navigating through channels and stuff like that. But we have an awareness because we've sold in multiple different areas. Some of that information as well. Because there are areas, again, that are tricky and challenging for a boat. You've got restrictions if you're on the Matitaconk, bridge restrictions, so that's something to look at a map. Why is this property so cheap? It's right on the river. Well, there's a bridge restriction. You can't have a fly bridge, or like a double decker boat because it won't fit under the bridge. That bridge does not open. So something to look, you could see on a map, look around, do some digging. Is there a bridge somewhere? Is there a restriction? You have to go under the bridge. If you have somebody that wants to be out on the ocean, they're going to want to probably be in Point Pleasant on the Manasquan or on the Manasquan side or Brielle side. You got easy access. You don't have to go through the canal. The canal's a rough place to live if you got to go out to the ocean. You know, if anybody wants to know what's up on a canal, go to Wavy Boats on Instagram. You'll see people getting rocked around on all kinds of
different was rough, man.
You know, that's, you know, if you have somebody that you know does fishing, you know, that's something that you need to know, because that could affect obviously you know, their experience. They're gonna say, why didn't you tell me I had to go through this crazy canal to get out to the ocean? Well, you may not have known, you know, but now you know, because the only other place to get out outside of Point Pleasant is you know, down between Long Beach Island and Island Beach State Park. You know, so that's a hike if you're coming from Brick or you're coming from Toms River. So you kind of have to go through the canal. But I think we're good, guys. So yeah, any questions, you know, feel free to reach out. But we'll wrap it up.
See you later, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks for tuning in.